In this video, I will show you the most important tattoo basics and techniques explained simply. Lining, shading, and color packing. I will also explain which needles are used for specific techniques, along with the ideal hand speed and voltage. Everything is filmed with a macro lens with double magnification. I have been working as a tattoo artist for about 10 years and have acquired this knowledge over the years. You will get the most important tattoo basics collected in one video, and all of this completely free of charge. I would appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel and like the video to support me. Needles. There are many different sizes and types of tattoo needles on the market, which can make it difficult to keep track of everything. But don't worry, I will now show you which needles I use and explain their areas of application. And you'll see it's not as complicated as it may seem. Choosing the right needle gauge. The gauge of the needle plays a crucial role in the type of work you want to perform. This is the first number on the needle packaging and indicates how thick the needle is at its thickest point. The most common numbers are 8 means the needle is 0.25 millimeters thick at its thickest point, ideal for detailed work, but very delicate. 10 means the needle is 0.3 millimeters thick at its thickest point. I believe you've understood the principle. The next number on the package determines the number of needles. The number of needles influences the thickness of the line. More needles mean a thicker line. With shader needles, more needles also mean thicker shading, which is logical. The letters after the numbers describe the needle type. In the world of tattoos, there are various needle types used for different purposes, from round liners to magnum shaders. Each needle has its own function and application. RL stands for round liner needles. Perfect for clear and clean line work. RS stands for round shader needles, ideal for filling colors and basic shading and thick lines. Round shaders are very similar to liner needles, but there is one major difference. The round shader needles are straight and are further apart. The circular arrangement of the needles creates a cavity. The M1 abbreviation stands for magnum needles. Here's a mistake you should avoid when working with a magnum needle that isn't rounded on the sides like a soft edge needle. It can strain the skin too much when filling large areas. I don't know anyone who uses this needle because it's simply too aggressive on the skin. Additionally, there are no smooth transitions at overlapping points. RM or CM stands for curved magnum shader needles. Offer better ink distribution and smoother shading. I use this needle very often and it's perfect for soft, clean shading. There are more needle types, but I don't want to confuse or overwhelm you. So I'll leave out those types because in practice, they're not commonly used, or let's say I don't use them. Now, let's talk about the last designation on the needle package, the letters at the very end. In technical terms, the needle tips are called tapers. These abbreviations simply denote the length and characteristics of the needle tip. MT stands for medium taper, representing a medium length tip suitable for thicker outlines and filling color areas. LT stands for long taper, which is a very long tip, an all-rounder, ideal for outlines and shading. XTL is an extreme long taper, even longer than LT, mainly intended for outlines. BP means bug pin, the finest taper type for extremely fine lines. With long taper needles, for example, you can tattoo on a spot for longer without damaging the skin too much, as the angle is very sharp. This is good for line work. On the other hand, a shorter tip transports more ink into the skin, but irritates the skin more. This is good for color packing with magnums. Of course, all of this also depends on the machine settings and speed. Usually, manufacturers already use the optimal taper for the corresponding tattoo needle, so don't worry about that. For example, I always assume that the manufacturer uses the right taper for the right needle. However, it's important to know what taper stands for and to have heard about it. You can find all the needles and the tattoo machine I currently use in the video description. With my discount code FANITATTOO, you can save 10% on your order. Now I will visually show you with a macro lens how deep I tattoo into the skin and which mistakes you should avoid. Additionally, I'll demonstrate in which layer of the skin the ink should be placed and what to watch out for with different skin types. If you don't go deep enough, the color will only reach the top layer of the skin, the epidermis. Conversely, if you go too deep, the color reaches the lowest layer of the skin, the subcutis, leading to a blowout. The needles should penetrate the top layer of the skin and then push the ink into the so-called dermis, a leathery layer that sits about 1 to 2 millimeters below the skin surface, depending on the skin type. This is what happens when you go too deep. As you can see, 2.5 millimeter is clearly too deep, resulting in a blowout and a disappointed client. Even though the needle protrudes 4 millimeter from the needle module, I don't press it all the way into the skin, allowing me to work with precision and feeling to create precise lines. This is what happens when you go too shallow. If the tattoo is too shallow and only penetrates the epidermis, the color can fade or appear uneven, ultimately resulting in an unhappy client. Additionally, individual skin characteristics can play a role, as certain skin types allow the needle to penetrate deeper than others. How do I recognize if a tattoo is too deep? The signs that you've tattooed too deeply are usually observed after the tattooing process. These signs might include scars, blisters, or inflammation. Because we always want satisfied customers, I'll now show you how deep I go to ensure perfection. The depth varies depending on the skin type and location, ranging between 0.5 and 1.5 millimeters. In areas where the skin is very thin, such as the elbow or ankle, I don't go as deep, unlike on a thicker area like the thigh, where I might go deeper. Makes sense. Now, let me demonstrate another mistake you should try to avoid. If you insert the needle into the skin abruptly without a smooth entry and exit, it can lead to an unintended black dot. The right approach is to enter gently and exit gently. When continuing the line, it's the same process: gentle entry and again a gentle exit. Hand speed and voltage. Hand speed and voltage are two of the most important fundamentals in tattooing. If you understand the balance between these two aspects, you can draw better lines, perfect your shading, and simultaneously protect your client's skin. In this video, I'll explain what hand speed and voltage mean, how they work together, and the techniques you can use to achieve optimal results. Hand speed refers to how fast or slow you move the machine over the skin. Voltage describes the voltage of your machine, which determines how fast the needle moves. A higher voltage means the needle moves faster and therefore penetrates the skin more aggressively. A lower voltage ensures the needle works more gently and penetrates the skin more slowly. It's essential that hand speed and voltage always work in harmony. A fast hand with low voltage will lead to weak lines, while a slow hand with high voltage can damage the skin. Lining. There are two methods for creating solid lines, no matter the needle size you use. When I make lines, regardless of whether the needle is thick or thin, I always use a 4.2 millimeter stroke and leave the needle about 4 millimeters out of the cartridge. To simplify, I use a 3 round liner, symbolically representing a thin needle, a 7 round liner, symbolically representing a thick needle. Method 1. Adjust voltage to match the needle size. What I mean by this is that, for example, if you are drawing a line with a 7 round liner at this speed, you can do the same with a 3 round liner. You just need to reduce the voltage. The message behind this is, the thinner the needle, the lower the voltage should be in order to maintain a consistent hand speed. I hope you know what I mean by this. In this case, the hand speed stays the same because I reduced the voltage from 8 to 5 volts with the thinner needle. Method 2. Adjust hand speed to match the needle size. What I mean by this is that I use needles of different thicknesses, but do not change the voltage. Instead, I simply adjust my hand speed. I use 8 volts for every line. With the thinner needle, I have to draw the line faster because it is more aggressive toward the skin and penetrates the skin more easily. With the thicker needle, it takes longer for the ink to penetrate the skin, so I draw the line slower. Both methods are effective for working with different needle size. Which one works best for you depends on your personal style and skill level. Test both approaches and find your own comfort zone to achieve perfect results. Shading. For shading, I use a 9 Magnum soft edge needle, 3.3 millimeter stroke, and leave the needle about 2 millimeters out of the cartridge. In my opinion, higher voltage, for example 8 volts or higher, leads to softer and smoother shading because the needle penetrates the skin faster, allowing the pigment to distribute more evenly. This enables you to create smooth transitions. For my hand speed, 8 volts work the best. In this video, I'll show you 8 different techniques for creating solid tattoo lines. Which technique is best for you will have to be determined by trying them out for yourself. But I'll talk more about my favorite technique later on. I use my free hand to stretch the skin in all techniques to work precisely. When pulling a line towards myself, I may adjust the angle, but I usually hold the machine like this. For the lateral angle, it's crucial that it's not too flat to avoid creating a blowout. It would be best not to use this angle at all, but if you do use it, I wouldn't go flatter than this. If the voltage of the machine is too high, I try not to tattoo over the same line more than twice to avoid causing massive skin damage, as you can see here. Choosing the right needle for outlining is crucial for creating clean and precise lines in a tattoo. The most commonly used needle for outlining is the round liner needle. This needle has a single round needle configuration, which is perfect for creating sharp, clean lines. For all the techniques I'm about to show you, I'm using only one needle, specifically a 7-round liner 0.3 millimeters. In the first technique, I let the needle protrude approximately 1 millimeter from the needle module. This is how I hold the tattoo machine. Since the needle only protrudes 1 millimeter from the module, I don't need to focus on depth because I can work with it hitting the stop. However, this technique only works on even surfaces. It doesn't work where depth varies on body parts. There's also a significant drawback here due to the unclear needle guidance, making it challenging to continue a line because the ink spot on the skin and the needle module obstruct the view. This is also why it's difficult to work cleanly on edges, as you can see here. For all the other techniques I'm about to show you, the needle protrudes approximately 4 millimeters from the needle module. In the next technique, I hold the machine at this angle and pull it toward me. I stabilize the guiding hand with my thumb, and it's essential to move the entire hand uniformly in one direction. This technique is very popular among tattoo artists, but I don't use it as often because regulating the correct needle depth is not as simple, and you can't work with it hitting the stop since the skin creates waves from the needles pushing. So if you use this technique, don't work with it hitting the stop. In this method, I hold the machine like this and pull it towards me. I also support the guiding hand with my free thumb. Because the needle is pulled, it's gentler on the skin, and it's also my favorite technique, which I use for most lines in practice. The good thing about it is that the needle's angle already determines a line, as you can see here. If I don't have an angle and the machine is straight, the natural form is a dot. This is the same technique, but with a lateral angle. The angle should never be shallower than this. I often use this technique in areas where it's not possible to hold the machine straight. I try to avoid it, but sometimes I have to use it. As you can see here, if the lateral angle is too shallow, it can cause a blowout. In the next technique, I hold the machine like this and make small back and forth movements. I only use this technique in areas that are difficult to tattoo, such as an elbow or knee, because I found that these areas don't accept the ink as well. I always draw my lines at 8 volts, but this can vary depending on the manufacturer. You'll need to experiment to find the voltage that suits you best. Let's talk about a mistake to avoid. It's important to move the machine evenly back and forth. Otherwise, you won't be able to create a nice line. For the next way to draw a line, I hold the machine like this. Since the hand movement already stretches the skin, I really like working with this technique and it's very practical. While I do push my hand, the needle is facing towards me, so this technique is much gentler on the skin compared to using a different angle. The same technique, but the needle is facing away from me, as you can see here. I actually don't use it at all. It's difficult to work with and it's much more aggressive to the skin. I have to admit, I could have tried a little harder to create a nice line here. But you know what it's like when you don't like something. Another important tip, which I have already explained in another video, is this one. If you deviate from the line even slightly, stop immediately and reposition your hand. In my opinion, one of the most important tips is that when you stop a line and want to continue later, it's important to exit the skin softly and re-enter softly. When tattooing a curve, I hold the machine like this and rotate my entire arm. I support the guiding hand with my thumb again and try not to change the angle of the machine, but move my entire arm. Shading. Now let's move on to shading. I will show you 7 different shading techniques and how to apply them. The first technique I'll be covering is the push whip shading technique. For this, I use a 9 Magnum soft edge needle, 8 volts, a 3.3 millimeter stroke, and let it extend about 2 millimeters from the cartridge. Now onto the technique. As you can see, I hold the machine with 3 fingers and push it away from me. The needle enters the skin vertically, and by adjusting the depth of the needle with hand movement, a gradient is created. It's important to note that artificial skin is much tougher than real skin, so it doesn't absorb ink as well. Therefore, more passes are required on artificial skin compared to real skin, where fewer passes would suffice for a solid shading. However, for the purpose of this demonstration, we're focusing solely on technique. This technique is great for working away from edges, but it can be challenging to create long, solid gradients. For beginners, combining this technique with a simpler design would be perfect, as it's easy to learn and can produce beautiful tattoos. As you can see, I've achieved a nice shading effect using only black ink, with the shading resulting from the depth of the needle. In practice, I've used this technique, for example, in the area shown in this tattoo. Now, let's address a common mistake to avoid. If you don't smoothly pull the needle out of the skin, you won't achieve a soft gradient. resulting in less satisfactory shading. Next, let's talk about the stipple, pepper whip shading technique, or whatever you want to call it. For this technique, I use a 7-round liner needle, 5 volts, a 4.2 millimeter stroke, and let the needle extend about 3 millimeters from the cartridge. Stippling shading involves inserting the needle into the skin and rotating the hand away from the needle's entry point on a rounded axis. You're doing it correctly if the needle can't enter the skin fast enough to make a solid line. Stippling occurs due to the fast hand movement. With decreased saturation, the further along an axis the hand rotates. Of course, you can also use a pulling motion for this technique as long as the voltage is low and the hand movement is fast. I've tattooed this design, for example, using this technique. Using too high a voltage with this technique doesn't yield the desired result, as you can see here. For the scumbling shading technique, I again use a soft edge magnum needle. With this technique, I make small circular motions, adjusting the depth of the needle with my hand movement to create shading. The slower the circular motions, the more solidly the ink is incorporated into the skin. Since I only want a light shading, I rotate the circular motions a bit faster. The texture created with this technique depends on the size of the circles and the pressure applied to the needle. This technique I often use in practice for dark backgrounds, such as in this tattoo at this particular spot. It's crucial to use a magnum needle with rounded corners for this technique. Otherwise, visible edges may appear in the shading, as you can see here. Now onto the pull whip shading technique. Unlike the push whip shading, I don't push the needle away from me, but instead pull it towards me. A significant advantage of this technique is that it's less aggressive on the skin. Whenever you pull a needle, it's less aggressive on the skin compared to pushing it away, which can result in less skin trauma. It's not just with this technique. Generally, a larger magnum needle yields a softer shading. In my opinion, this technique is perfect for creating light shading, like in this area of this tattoo of the King of Rock and Roll. Let's address another mistake to avoid. If you start too slowly and don't maintain a consistent movement, it can lead to a black spot where you initially started. Now, onto dot work shading. For this, I again use a 7-round liner needle. Here, I attempt to create shading from bottom to top with small dots. The shading is determined by the distance between the dots and the depth to which the needle is inserted into the skin. Generally, this technique is straightforward to learn and thus perfect for beginners. I'm curious if there are still viewers here who have been with me since the beginning of my YouTube journey. Feel free to write in the comments since when you've been following, and thank you for your support. If you're new to the channel, I would appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel to not miss any further videos. I tattooed this design, for example, using this technique. If you go too deep, it can result in a blowout, which may not be immediately visible after tattooing, but becomes apparent once the tattoo has healed. You can see the principle illustrated nicely on paper here, showing what happens when you linger too long in the skin. This is cross shading. For the next technique, the needle extends approximately 2 millimeters from the cartridge. With this technique, I shade in 2 different directions. To make it less aggressive on the skin, I also pull the needle towards me. The goal is to create shading that resembles a net. This technique is useful when the needle structure is visible in a shading. With the second pass in a different direction, you can blend it, resulting in a softer shading. This technique could also be done with a liner needle to create the cross-hatching effect, as you can see beautifully illustrated in this picture. Here, I use this technique. You can also create very soft shading with it. Now, let's talk about a mistake to avoid. It's important to keep the needle parallel to the skin. Otherwise, you'll get uneven shading, as you can see here. The best comes last. Pendulum shading. With this technique, I do the majority of my shading. This is how I hold the machine and move it evenly back and forth. I love this technique because it yields a soft shading in every direction, allowing for long, continuous shading. Even with round liner needles, you can tattoo this method excellently to create fine, detailed shading. In this design, I mainly applied pendulum shading. Unlike here, you should try to make controlled movements so that it results in a solid shading in the end. Now I will show you how I apply the color packing technique. With this technique, I have filled areas in these tattoos, for example. I will also show you which needles I would not use. This is how it looks to the human eye, but I'll show you with a macro lens. Let's get started. For large areas, I use a 13 Magnum soft edge needle. For this technique, I work with 8 volts, a 3.9 millimeter stroke, and let the needle extend about 2 millimeters from the cartridge. It is important to always have enough ink in the cartridge. I need to mention beforehand that artificial skin is not the same as real skin. Artificial skin absorbs ink much worse. On real skin, the ink would spread much faster into the skin pores. However, I'll still show it as if I were tattooing real skin, which will make it look blotchy, but on real skin, it would be a nice black area. Of course, I could tattoo it in a way that looks good on silicone skin, but that's counterproductive because I assume you want to see the technique I use on real skin. I make circular, even movements and don't go deeper than 1.5 millimeters. With the Magnum, I don't tattoo right up to the edges. I leave some space around and fill it in later with a thinner needle. Here's a mistake you should avoid when working with a Magnum needle that isn't rounded on the sides like a soft edge needle. It can strain the skin too much when filling large areas. I don't know anyone who uses this needle because it's simply too aggressive on the skin. Additionally, there are no smooth transitions at overlapping points. For the first pass, I use small circular motions in one direction. This step is to open the skin. On real skin, blood would start to emerge. It's not essential at this stage to fully incorporate the color for a solid area. I'll explain why later. Now, onto the next mistake to avoid. As you can see here, try to steer clear of uncontrolled movements. It's crucial to make controlled, even movements. This is how you evenly embed the color into the skin. I push the color that's on the skin in front of me and work it into the skin. I'm using a 13 Magnum here, but for larger areas you can use a larger needle. The technique remains the same. I've noticed that only about 9% of the viewers have subscribed to my channel. I'd be thrilled to hit 10% with your help, so please subscribe to the channel and like the video to support me. To minimize the visibility of the needle structure, I prefer to hold my needle slightly to the side. As a lot of ink falls onto the skin when working with Magnum needles, it's crucial to use enough Vaseline to make wiping easier. During filling, it's essential to work patiently and evenly and take your time. Rushing ultimately takes longer when you have to correct mistakes. Because of the rounded needle edges, you can't notice transitions between the two bars. That's the effect we're aiming for. To work cleanly along the edges, I use a 9-round shader needle, 8 volts, and a 3.9 millimeter stroke. The needle extends about 3 millimeters from the cartridge. Try it first on silicone skin to get a feel for the machine and voltage. To work cleanly at the edge, I prefer to make long, oval circular motions. Typically, I work directly at the edges with the Magnum needle, but because it requires a lot of practice, I'd recommend working as we're doing here for tattoo beginners. I'm doing this everywhere. I'm skipping the rest. Now onto the second pass. On real skin, the result would already look much better, yet a second pass is necessary because it takes time for the swelling to reduce and for the tattoo to bleed a bit. Once the plasma has come out of the skin takes the color much more easily. That's why I always take a short break after the first pass. During the second pass, it's crucial to tattoo in a different direction. This creates a kind of network under the skin that results in a solid black area. Never do more than 2 passes. Otherwise, the skin will be overworked, which can lead to scarring. Also, it's essential to reiterate that artificial skin doesn't accept color as well as real skin. Now on to the second part of the second pass. I'm doing one last touch-up with the thin needle. So, that was a long session with a lot of information. Don't stress yourself. Learn everything step by step. You can always rewatch parts of this video and try applying it on fake skin. And if you're interested in which tattoo machine I use, check out this video here.